The killing of George Floyd, caught on cell phone video, catapulted our country into a summer of protests with millions of Americans pushing for, demanding long overdue change. And there were some immediate changes symbolically, to be sure. But what about policies? What about policing itself? What actually has changed since George Floyd was killed 7 months ago?
Hundreds of Confederate statues from the Deep South to here in Seattle were taken down by activists or by local governments. Black Lives Matter murals and tributes to those who died went up in front lawns and on city streets all around the world. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had 4 portraits of Confederate congressmen taken down at the U.S. House of Representatives, and House Democrats passed the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act to combat police misconduct, excessive force, and racial bias in policing, though it still hasn't been brought to the Republican-controlled Senate floor. NASCAR and each branch of the U.S. military banned the Confederate flag, and Mississippi finally became the last state to eliminate the Confederacy from its state flag. Several sports franchises and schools changed their mascots, from the Washington, D.C. NFL team to Juanita High School in Kirkland. School boards in Seattle, Minneapolis, Denver, and Portland all severed ties with local police departments, turning campus security over to private organizations. The city of Seattle banned police chokeholds, as did San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and more. Mayors and police chiefs from Chicago, Baltimore, and Phoenix, as well as others, joined forces to create the Police Form and Racial Justice Working Group. Dallas police adopted a duty to intervene rule, requiring officers to intervene if another one is using excessive force. Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and Seattle all reduced their police departments' budgets, although none were slashed as much as some activists wanted. But in Seattle, the contention between the mayor, the police, and city council over police funding,
I'm done. Can't do it,
triggered the sudden retirement of Carmen Best, the city's first African-American police chief, in September. More attention came to the investigation over Manuel Ellis's death in Tacoma police custody, and by next year, police departments in Tacoma, Everett, and Bremerton will join officers in Seattle, Spokane, Kent, and other cities who are required to wear body cameras, although to be fair, all of those departments who are adding body cams in 2021 had plans in the works well before Floyd was killed. At the state level in Washington, Governor Inslee established a social justice committee, and lawmakers are working on various pieces of legislation to improve police accountability by making it easier to decertify bad cops, by creating a use of force database, by having civilians lead investigations of misconduct, by mandating officers to intervene when they see misconduct, or by simply banning police chokeholds statewide. But no laws have been enacted, in part because state politicians haven't been in Olympia since March and won't reconvene until the new year. When they do, it will be a more diverse body than ever before. To be fair, many of the candidates registered before George Floyd was killed, but more people of color were elected to the state legislature than ever before. The number of black women will triple from 2 to 6, and in Maryland Strickland, Washington elected a black woman to U.S. Congress for the first time.
King 5's Steve Bunin begins our breaking news coverage.
This news broke just a few hours ago, and it is heartbreaking. Investigators now believe rookie police officer Jonathan Shoup was killed not by the man allegedly avoiding that traffic stop, but instead by friendly fire, that he was accidentally shot by his own partner. This all happened Monday night before 10 o'clock when Shoup and his partner, Officer Mustafa Kumkur, stopped a car on State Route 522 in Bothell for not having a license plate. Detectives and investigators now believe they have a more precise timeline of what happened. They say the suspect first tried to drive away, hitting a man on a scooter. Then the suspect, they say, walked toward the patrol car. Officer Shoup was in the driver's seat. Officer Kumkur was in the passenger seat, holding his firearm as the man approached the driver's side door. Investigators say he fired twice on the car. One bullet broke that driver's side window, and the other bullet hit Officer Kumkur's gun in the passenger seat, ricocheted, and struck Officer Kumkur in the head. Investigators also believe that Officer Kumkur fired multiple times, and one of those shots struck and killed Officer Shoup in the driver's seat in the crossfire. By the time help arrived, Officer Shoup was already dead. The suspect ran. Investigators say evidence now shows before he was arrested on a nearby rooftop, he called a 911 call center in Kansas to alert his family that he had, quote, shot and killed a police officer. His name is Henry Eugene Washington. He is 37, and he is now charged with 3 felonies, including aggravated murder in the first degree. According to state law, even though the bullet didn't appear to come from Washington's gun, he can be held legally responsible because prosecutors say had he not attacked the officers, nobody would have died. So again, it's just a tragic turn of events this afternoon. I'm Steve Bunin, King 5 News.
We begin with Steve Bunin, who shows us Washington Representative Pramila Jayapal was at the center of it all for a second straight day.
Well, first of all, we'd be remiss if we didn't point out the comic irony that the historic testimony with the 4 CEOs of these tech giants was delayed an hour and then stopped midway through because of tech problems. Tech giant CEOs, they're just like the rest of us. Once they began testifying remotely because of the pandemic, the verbal fireworks came quickly.
Your company harvests and monetizes our data, and then your company uses that data to spy on competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten smaller competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's very model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy, it harms mom-and-pop businesses, and it harms consumers. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The CEOs face pointed questions from both Republicans and Democrats about a variety of issues. Google's control of the search engine market and YouTube, Facebook's handling of hate speech and competitors, Apple's dominance of apps, and Amazon's treatment of warehouse workers as well as third-party sellers, which became a contentious point with Jeff Bezos, who was testifying before Congress for the very first time.
We have a policy against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jayapal that that policy isn't violated routinely.
Well, we are investigating that.
It wasn't all confrontational, but with 4 companies combining for a value of nearly $5 trillion, even some of the politicians' supportive statements were laced with cynicism.
The whole goal of this committee's work is to make sure that there are more Amazons, that there are more Apples, that there are more companies that get to innovate and small businesses get to thrive. And that is what we're trying to get at. That is why we need to regulate these marketplaces so that no company has a platform so dominant that it is essentially a monopoly.
The antitrust investigation has been going on for about a year now, and the New York Times reports that it is coming to an end soon, but there is no known timeline for any action Congress might eventually take. Steve Bunin, King 5 News.
But more often than not, their pregnancies do fail. As Steve Bunin reports, experts are trying to do something about that.
Hopefully they'll be able to find the fish that are there and stay fat and happy.
State and federal governments are trying to help 3 orcas, 1 in each southern resident pod, see their pregnancies through the 18 months or so to delivery.
There's actually only so many females that are actually of reproductive status. So the fact that we're getting this hat trick, it's a great thing.
They're also hoping it resonates a little more after we all watched Tahlequah, also known as J35, pushing her dead calf through the Salish Sea for 17 days 2 years ago. If you're wondering, one of the ways scientists can tell that whales are pregnant is studying pictures taken from satellites in outer space. So compare side by side. This is Tahlequah in last fall, September 2019. Compared to this summer, here, July 2020. And if you look closely, you can see a wider belly, but only about 30% of pregnancies in orca pods here go through. There's one big reason why: lack of food. But you can't just dump more Chinook salmon into the sea. Scientists agree that would be bad for the entire ecosystem. But they are hoping to convince people to just stay away.
Say, for example, you're trying to eat a sandwich and somebody comes right up to you and starts taking photographs of you. Well, you're going to pause and wonder what the heck is going on. This is what these animals do as well. These are very smart, very sentient animals, and so it's important for us to give them their space so that they can live in peace.
So officials are reminding boaters, you're now required to stay at least 300 yards away from whales, and just as importantly, you have to slow down to 7 knots or less.
The speed of a vessel is tied directly to the sound that it makes. Not just the presence of that vessel, but the sound that it makes is what has a very negative impact on these whales. The science has proven that.
And that goes for small boats and large vessels alike. Just being that close and going too fast disrupts the communication that orcas use to find fish. And if these 3 pregnant whales can find enough food, experts expect them to deliver their babies soon. Steve Bunin, King 5 News.